You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Hello, everybody. Well, happy Halloween. Welcome to the newest episode of MAFF'S Movie Show. I am your host. You may know me as Ted Lasso. I was in the UK. I came back here to visit my family, and I'm making a new video. And we're going to talk about some Spider-Man today, and I've seen some negativity out there, and I'm all about the positivity. I'm like Norma Desmond right now in Sunset Boulevard. I'm ready for my close-up. One of my best players on the field will tell you, football is life. And for a lot of people, Spider-Man is also life. End scene. But yeah, I don't really have anything I want to talk about this week in relation to like news or specific things that happened in the world. I do feel like there's a lot of negativity though, especially in social media. If anybody who watches this video is on social media in concern to upcoming Marvel movies, and I don't want to add noise or fire to any of that on either side of the argument. I just want to start building up, I guess, anticipation for one of my most hyped up movies of the year, later half of the year especially, Spider-Man No Way Home. So I'm going to start talking about the first Spider-Man movie from 2002, directed by Sam Raimi, starring the one and only Tobey Maguire. This is the one. This and the next one. More than any other movie out there, Indiana Jones's, The Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future, like any movie that was critical to the formation of my movie-loving world. This is really where it all started. I guess that little seed that blew up into a giant star, that this is the one. And it's hard for me to look at this from an objective lens. If I try to do that, I feel like what I do see is a flawed movie, and there are things that don't really hold up like they did in 2002. There are certain aspects of it that visually and sonically are very reminiscent of an earlier time that kids who are born way later will not care for or understand. And obviously, the people probably like the new Tom Holland movies a lot more. Especially like Generation Z, kids who are growing up now, the TikTok generation. It feels like you are the old grandpa for liking the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, which is really weird. Because I do think, as cheesy and silly and campy as the Sam Raimi movies are, I still think, especially the first two, but since we're talking about the first one today, the first Spider-Man movie I think does hold up as an enjoyable, entertaining comic book movie. And it stands on its own. It's got a really interesting, fun villain in Willem Dafoe. And since it's Halloween, technically it's November 1st when you're watching this, but since we're talking about Halloween, look at this guy's face. And he knows his face is just the most spookiest thing that you've ever damn seen. So, like, happy Halloween, everybody. Even people who don't really care for movies like I do, I feel like you have a handful of memories that are very vivid and stay that way for your entire life. You know where you went, you know who you went with, and you know the whole day from beginning to end. This is one of those movies for me. I think the music from Danny Elfman is some of the best superhero music or some of the best blockbuster music still to this day. I think Sam Raimi's visual eye and vision for what he wanted from like a Steve Ditko Spider-Man brought to life still holds up really well. The costume is still amazing to me, no pun intended there. This was the first time that Spider-Man was adapted for the big screen, and they wanted to step it up. And this was really the movie that really made the push for the reason why Hollywood should really invest more money into comic book movies, because obviously now they have taken over the entire stratosphere of Hollywood movie making. Like, all the biggest blockbusters that come out are superhero movies. Still, it's been like over a decade, and we get big movies from DC and Marvel, multiple movies every year. That's insane. And Spider-Man had a big hand in making that happen. Because at the time, this was right after 9/11. And 9/11 was I don't have to go over it. But it was a really dark time. And this was the first big blockbuster after that happened to really bring people together in terms of seeing a movie. The people in New York City and New York City itself are big characters in the movie. And I think that's on purpose. I think a lot of that has to do with reshoots or the way they brought a characterization to seeing how the people of New York react to seeing a Spider-Man swinging around the streets. Like when they had that little montage of literally have Jim Norton there being like, he stinks and I don't like him. You have that moment on the bridge where Green Goblin and Spider-Man are fighting, and then suddenly a gang of New Yorkers just kind of help Spider-Man out. And they go, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. Like, that was a big, like, after 9/11, that was such a big deal to see that to see the people of New York, and to see New York represented, and that was a really big deal. And I think it still is, because you don't really get personality like that out of geographical aspects of a movie. That doesn't happen a lot with superhero movies. You kind of have your titular hero and your antagonist and like the story that kind of guides you along the way. But Sam Raimi injected a lot of personality from just his previous work with the Evil Dead movies, and just like the way they really brought this blockbuster together, I think really holds up awesomely well. Tobey Maguire, I get it. If you don't like him, you don't like him. It's just the way it is. He has like an awkward personality the entire way through. There's parts of the movie where he just kind of freezes and pauses and has like a derpy face on him. And I think it's purposeful because they're trying to make him so dorky, like over the top dorky. And I mean, people who love Toby. I'm a big Toby guy. He is my guy. I don't care what anybody says. Anybody who says otherwise is obviously wrong. But I totally understand where people are coming from when they say they don't like Tobey Maguire. It's very easy to be put off by the way he acts in this movie, but for the story, it makes a lot of sense. I think it adds a distinguishable element when he's Peter Parker versus when he's Spider-Man. I think it makes it all the more exaggerated in a good way when he's out there swinging and wooing and just having a ball swinging through the streets of New York. Those sky cameras that go and swoop down through the streets as he's like swinging, they add so much to the movie, and it adds so much to your imagination, I think, when you're watching it, because you really get that sense of scale and that thrill. As mentioned before, Willem Dafoe is the Green Goblin. Scary as hell. He just hams it up the entire time, and they give him a nice amount of screen time, showing how much of a jerk he is, how much he hates his son Harry and likes Peter Parker as a person more than his own son, and how that's so messed up psychologically for Harry. Harry Osborn in this movie makes bad choices. He makes a lot of mistakes, but you kind of see where he's coming from as a character. They kind of build that right, I think, with his relationship with Peter and showing how he might feel the neglect from his own father, where his father really prefers his best friend over him. Like, you see how that like gets to him. The action scenes, I love everything about this movie, but I understand in this regard also why people might feel some type of way about how they're executed. The scene in Times Square with the hot air balloons and Macy Gray singing and the CGI air balloons, and they're hopping on them, and the Green Goblin comes with the pumpkin bombs that turn people into skeletons, which is insane. The actual ending fight where Peter Parker gets his ass kicked. And I love seeing, in these movies especially, I love seeing how battle damaged the suit gets. Like, literally, Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire is, like, bleeding all over the place. Half the mask is blown up from a pumpkin bomb blowing up in his face. He's, like, so close to death. I'm just jumping all over the place now, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, the most iconic casting choice of the 21st century, probably. Like, he is perfect in that role. Even if you don't know who the character is, the moment you see him on screen, you love him. You love his personality. He's like the most entertaining dickhead ever. Just every line that comes out of his mouth is just perfect. It's literally perfect. The writing for his character, perfect. The way they set up the scenes in the office at the Daily Bugle, everything about even like Betty Brant, his assistants. One of them is played by Sam Raimi's brother, Ted. I'm forgetting the guy from Do the Right Thing. I'm forgetting his name, but I love that character so much too. Like, the whole dynamic of the Daily Bugle office couldn't have done any better with those scenes, in my opinion, even looking back at it now 20 years later. I also love Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, even though she's basically just a giant monologue machine. Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben, I think, is the best iteration of Uncle Ben of this who we got in movies so far. I love how earnest he is, and you feel so bad when he drops him off for the wrestling gig. He doesn't really know it's a wrestling gig at the time. He's just going to the New York Public Library to read. And he tries to give him that speech about the fight when he has with Flash Thompson. And Tobey Maguire just, like, shuns him. Like just totally, like, shuts him down. And Cliff Robertson's acting in this scene in the car is some of the most heartbreaking stuff. But even going back to that wrestling part, like, I don't get... So, the ad says, you survive for 3 minutes with Macho Man Randy Savage. Got you for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of playtime. So, you get $3,000. He wanted to get a car to impress Mary Jane. Okay, teenager shit. He pins him in two. So this dirtbag is like, you pinned him in two. For that, I give you 100. What? Who is this guy? He deserved to get robbed. Yeah, speaking of that, I forgot to mention the whole wrestling match, which I think is also a really fun scene. I guess minus the part where he makes a little homophobic slur. Yeah, that didn't really age too well, but we got a fun meme out of it. Kirsten Dunst back in the early 2000s was all over the place. Like, she was like a really hot actress, so it made sense to cast her in this role. And people have such a weird big problem with her in general in these movies. I don't. I understand where people are coming from later on, where she just becomes like a damsel in distress and she doesn't really have an arc of her own to really carry her on her own 2 feet. I understand that criticism, but I think in this movie, what they give her is fine. And how can you not like the iconic Spider-Man kiss? Like, that's the other thing. And this movie is really, really good with the iconography, with the visual language of film, and really bringing moments that like are unforgettable. One of my biggest criticisms about Marvel now is that I feel like the movies are just made in a machine, most of them anyway, and you don't really get that iconic imagery that you expect from movies like this. When you see Tim Burton's Batman and Richard Donner's Superman, and like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, even like Daredevil with Ben Affleck. Like, there are certain moments where they know it's important to, like, it's based on a comic book. You want to bring in like images that pop. And then again, the music by Danny Elfman really complements everything awesomely throughout the entire movie. Consistently great music. It captures the essence of Peter Parker Spider-Man. We've gotten so many iterations of the character since 2002 that looking back on this now, I think criticisms that people had about this movie on the internet back in the early 2000s kind of have subsided, because this movie is so unique, especially this one, and like all the Sam Raimi movies have a distinct feel. And I think it really pops even more now because of what we've gotten since then with Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland. And I think a lot of people, especially if this movie upcoming in December, if all the rumors are true, a lot of kids who were born years after this movie came out are going to go back and watch this for the first time. Every time I watch it, it brings me right back to 2002 and everything I've already talked about with how big of a deal the movie was back then after 9/11 and New York, and how like just the movie made so much money at the box office and had such an impact on pop culture. And it still does. The ripple effects are still showing today, obviously, because they're bringing back we think they're bringing back Tobey Maguire for this new movie. And people are really excited to see that. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, I will be more than happy to keep going with 2 and 3 and Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 and the home Tom Holland movies, you know, because Homecoming and Far From Home and now No Way Home. So, yeah, we'll take a little trip down Spider-Man memory lane leading into No Way Home. But if big news comes out about whatever, I'm still going to be talking about those too. But this was a nice diversion from what I've been usually doing with this show. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate it. It would be really awesome if you want to. You could like this. If you haven't already, you can subscribe. You could ring the bell and then comment down below. Talk about your favorite memories with Spider-Man 2002 and what's your favorite Spider-Man movie? Let's hear about it. Once again, thank you for watching. Hope you had an awesome, safe, fun, and spooky Halloween. We're in November now. How is time a thing that makes sense? It doesn't make sense. It's November? How? I started making these videos in late June, early July. How is that possible? Anyway, see you guys next week. I love y'all. Take care. Be safe. This is Ted Lasso signing off. If you didn't realize, that was actually a reference to one of my favorite movies, Alien. That alien is scary. It reminds me of my boss's ex. Yeah. Not a nice looking creature. Nah.